I am very pleased to welcome our MnDOT Commissioner Charles Zelle to speak with us today. He's appointed by Governor Dayton and he's led the Department of Transportation since January of 2013. I'll give you a little background, then I'll tell you what we really brought him here. He was born and raised in St. Paul, received a BA from Bates College and an MBA from the Yale School of Management. He worked in the Jefferson Lines for more than 25 years, served as President and Chief Executive Officer. He is currently the chair of the Jefferson Lines Board of Directors, although he is no longer an employee with any management authority. Some of his current community and civic activities include he's a member of the working group of the Itasca Project, which is kind of a think tank, I think. A member of the Executive Committee of the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies. Member of the Board of Directors, Executive Committee of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And he's been recognized for his work by receiving a couple of awards, the George Rucker Award by the Community Transportation Association and the Ray Lapagard, a Distinguished Service Award by the Center of Transportation Studies. Now, here's why we have invited him. The past 2 years, he's been tirelessly traveling the state to visit different communities and promote the governor's transportation funding plan, which, as you recall, we did support. He also put together, and this is, you know, I'm very big on this idea, and this is the first time the Department of Transportation has done that. I think they did it because of Commissioner Zelle. Put together a comprehensive list of the transportation projects that would be funded with the governor's plan. In other words, show what the tax increase would be used for. Thus, that's how we like to operate. So this list was key to make a case for raising transportation money because it demonstrates the dire need across every region of the state. Now, Commissioner Zelle has also been a steadfast supporter of the Corridors of Commerce program, which many of you know, Highway 14, Highway 23, many of the other major problem highways in greater Minnesota. He has set MnDOT's policy to ensure Corridors of Commerce funding is regionally balanced and greater Minnesota is treated fairly. Now, this is a very big deal because this doesn't always happen, as you know. The CGMC is aligned with Governor and Commissioner Zelle on many issues, including the need for additional revenue to meet Minnesota's transportation needs. Our staff always found the Commissioner and his staff to be extremely accessible and cooperative, and we look forward to continuing that positive relationship in the future. We know he is missing another important meeting today to be here with us, and we're grateful that he took the time out of his busy schedule to speak with us. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Zelle.
Thank you so much. What a great honor. And Tim, it's great to know why you really called me here. I'm always curious, so it's good to do that right at the beginning. And it's great to be here, but also to see so many of my friends. You know, one of the great honors of being a commissioner, I was just saying earlier, is that I really get to know the great state of Minnesota. I mean, I was born and raised here, and I've certainly been around, but not as much as I have, certainly over the past 4 years, and I got to know mayors and the communities that you all live in, and so I actually appreciate the opportunity to kind of give you, you know, some of these messages that you're all familiar with, maybe update a few, but more importantly, hear from you what you think, and maybe get into a little question and answer. But first off, great to be here in Alex. I have a great heart here. Not only is it a great place with Great Lakes resorts, but it has some great stories about road projects and a great airport, by the way. I should say I'm truly a multimodal commissioner of all transportation, not just roads and highways, but airports and ports, bikeways. But we're also do manage we manage the maintenance of roads. And, you know, I was out on Highway 494 around 55 yesterday. We're talking about a ribbon cutting. Beautiful sunny day. And, you know, there is always this idea that Minnesota has two seasons. Everybody talks about it, road construction and winter. Actually, that's not entirely true. We have this one day that's in between. Yeah, it's today. And because right behind us, and I really appreciate your condensing everything into today, and I just want you to be assured that the plows are standing by, the work crews are already called in, and salt is in the shed and it's in the truck, and we have been actually talking to one of our maintenance supervisors just this morning right here. They're kind of ready to go. You know, this is a little bit like you know, after you've been through spring training, you want to play the big league. So you know, for MnDOT, we want the storm to come. But we want to hear that. We want to hear about kind of you know, where are we today and what do we got coming ahead. You know, just to get us off the table, kind of a quiet, not such a quiet week in Minnesota or nationally. You know, goodness, elections have consequences, and we're not quite sure what all those consequences are going to be. But we do know that the condition of our infrastructure has not improved really much over the past 4 years. We still have the same outlook. Our economy is doing well, which means that the requirements to sustain it is also not gone away. The one line here that is maybe different in the past year is our thoughts toward the future gap has actually increased. Our 20-year outlook for our Minnesota State Highway Improvement Plan, which is a 20-year programmatic outlook of where we are with existing resources that we can count on versus what we view the need. And we're looking at an $18 billion gap, 18 with a B. That's pretty phenomenal for one state to have that amount of undercapitalization. And it was 12 billion. So you know, our last time, we do this every 4 years, and we're now just having this out now for almost final approval. It hasn't officially been signed, but the arithmetic is there. And to be honest, I've had some public officials, some who are no longer in office, but were chairing the key committees, have told me that they felt this was a political document. And I'm going to be really pretty candid and maybe unfiltered because I've gotten to know the planners and the engineers are pretty nonpartisan, pretty fact-based folks who really do drill deep into what the analysis is that we're facing in Minnesota. And this gap's real, and it's real because it is not just the expansions and the interchanges that we want for congestion, for safety, for business access. It's just the system itself is deteriorating, and when you haven't had that additional funding for the past 4 years, not only do we miss those 4 years, the costs are going up. The costs are going up because if we don't preserve what we have, it gets more expensive. So just to give you a sense of the next few years, people ask, how's the funding going to work? This is actual road construction budgets. For the state system, this is not local county, but it is the state of Minnesota highways and bridges. Been pretty robust. A lot of this, these little green and these charts, is bonding. We are right up to our bond limit. So issuing more trunk highway bonds is not a really viable solution without funds to help pay for that, for those bonds, for the debt associated with bonds. what I've often said to my own boss, Governor Dayton, who looks at various financing alternatives. And what I've said is, Governor, in my 25 years running a bus business, one thing I have learned is that when you borrow money, they expect you to pay it back. And so we have to look carefully at how we finance it. So if we look at the next 3 years, with no additional financing, no additional revenues, it's a big drop down. And I haven't shown you the chart, but you can all imagine it. The actual costs, because they're increasing with inflation and with need, are really going the opposite direction. Just to let you know what that is on a district level, you can kind of see where you, what part of the state you're living in and where your town is, but you can see that given this next year, we actually have a pretty robust plan because we have some large projects which are wrapping up. But from about 2018 on, it's down. In some areas, I'll pick on District 6 and 7 in the southern part of the state, since I was talking to my friend Dave here from Granite Falls. It's a precipitous drop. And of course, you will see corresponding deterioration. So here's the plan from 4 years ago. We still haven't announced the future 20-year plan, but it'll look a little like this. But you can see it's pretty well spread out. Just taking care of pavements. And here's the problem. You know, we talk about all the new projects we want, but the day in, day out, and this is something you all understand completely because you face it. You know each curb cut, you know your entire neighborhood, you know the cost of what it takes to maintain a road. And pavements are eating us alive. You know, we're in a tough part of the world. And if we were to actually program this next 20 years and keep pavements just on the state system in the same condition that they are now, we would have to dedicate over 80% of the future funds just on pavements. And we're obviously not going to do that because, you know, we have bridges and we have other needs. So that's a hard scenario to plan for because we are going to disappoint across the board, every community and every stakeholder. And part of the issue that I think is interesting when we think about this perfect storm is it's a hard reality to act on, and we all know that. And maybe now with the new legislature, I've heard everything from like, don't even try to now's our great opportunity. And I think it is an opportunity. And I think the opportunity is in part because taking a longer-term vision is essential, and actually you in this room know this better than anybody else, because if we don't act, we are pushing this burden kind of like debt right on to the next generation, frankly, quite literally to our children and our grandchildren. And I think when you're a legislator, you are constricted by geography and by time limit. It really is kind of about the next 2 years. Well, you know, it is actually about the next 20 years, and I think it is so hard to hold those with the power to make action accountable to a longer period of time. But that's kind of what we all collectively, honestly, have to do if we want to keep Minnesota healthy. We have perfect storm hasn't gone away, and as the storm comes our direction tonight, it's increased costs, increased population. Freight and freight movements is a huge issue, particularly for greater Minnesota, and I hear that in every part of the state about access to manufacturing, access to markets, and not just the congestion in the metro, but it is the everything from damaged livestock and eggs to not being able to really have a manufacturing facility that's effective when you don't have access to it. So what are we going to do? Okay, so this is the same old kind of story, and but I'm going to add some other comments, maybe in our question and answer period. It is a $6 billion, and Tim referred to that in terms of the state system. That's a 10-year outlook. $4 billion of that is for really preserving the system we have, and then $2 billion is for expansion, corridors of commerce, other programs that allow us to modernize our system. But the other figure is that $2.3 billion. That's really the direct, by formula, allocation for counties and municipalities. And we know that if it goes into the dedicated, constitutionally dedicated funding formula, that money will come, and it is a sense budget relief for every municipality. So I am obviously going to say that user fees is really the way to go. The most well-known user fee is a gas tax. But for Minnesota, it's not just the fuel tax. There's registration fees, and there's motor vehicle sales tax. Actually, motor vehicle sales tax and registration fees fund more than the gas tax in Minnesota, simply because those two elements are naturally indexed, and the fuel tax is not. It just, in fact, we forecast it to be going down, not just adjusted for inflation. In actual terms, our gas tax will go down because cars are getting more fuel efficient, and people just aren't driving that much more. Even though they're driving more with low gas prices, not enough to make up for car fuel efficiency. And so people around the country are clamoring for more investment. We're not alone. And many states in the past couple of years have raised gas taxes. This is the map of those 20 states and the District of Columbia that have raised fees. And I just came back from Boston for a meeting of the East ASHTO, which is a collection of secretaries and commissioners. There's a number of other states, state governors, and guess what? Republican state governors, who are going to be advancing proposals for gas tax increases. Seems to be a dirty word in Minnesota, but I just have to lay out the facts. There are Republican states, some very near us, who are now have gas taxes that are more than Minnesota. And so to the extent that it is prudent to pay for what you get, and I know the governor will continue to make the case. I was joking with my friend Kevin here on the way out that, in Minnesota, where the bridges used to be strong, the roadways used to be good looking, but the gas tax is now below average. We're actually in the lower half of the country in terms of gas tax rates, which is really the first time this last year. So, when people say, oh, we're such a high-cost state, we're not in this context. So the investment, we talk about $6 billion to 10-year outlook for the state system, but it's not lost at all on us. That $2.5 billion for cities, counties is part of the governor's proposal. It is also building out the metro transit area, which the governor's proposed be covered by the metro area, not be a burden of state government. And simply to give permission to the metro, what most areas of the state have, which is 9 counties, and the local MPO to raise its own funds. So it is a large investment over 10 years. I fully expect that the governor will not back off of that proposal. He will certainly have an opening budget. It is my full expectation that he will push forward on his proposal. Now, where that all lands, we can talk about here in a minute. But I do want to make a somewhat of a case toward what we can do with the money that we have. The governor said, think about MnDOT and the state of Minnesota as you would run your business. And I run a business, actually an asset-intensive business. When I buy buses, or when I refurbish buses, if I do it on the cheap, I pay more over time. I pay more because those buses break down, and not only do I have annoyed customers, but you know, the cost of a breakdown is much worse than doing the preventive maintenance up front. And so sometimes, you know, it pays to spend the money and to do a long-term fix. And we're doing that. We're doing that in a lot of countless little ways. And the governor's also asked, and we say at MnDOT, when you're spending money, we do this at the district level, think of it as if it's your own, as if it's your own business. What would you do for that money? And so we're using stainless steel rebar instead of the galvanized, instead of the green epoxy, the reinforcement. We're using aluminized pipe instead of galvanized pipe. Even though it costs 18% more, it lasts, you know, well over 50 years for a galvanized pipe. This is 100-year bridges we're building, not 50-year bridges. We know over time, over the life, that we are going to not only have a better system, but we're actually going to save a lot of our money. We want to be smart with what we're spending. You'll see more LED lights around the state of Minnesota. They cost more, they absolutely do, but they last for 17 years. I mean, it's extraordinary how much money we're saving just on electricity. I had the chief executive of Zelle make a kind of a funny comment to me when I ran into him at a reception, and he says, I drive around and I see all these new street lamps. He says, you're not the customer you used to be. You're not buying as much electricity. And I said, well, I'm happy for that. But we're also being smart about how we work with local communities. We have a great example in Alexandria, also nearby in Glenwood. We are actually working with mayors, working with you to think about when your main street is a state highway, when you are going in and need to take care of utility work and we're doing a resurfacing, we can apply additional grants, make it more livable, enhance the retail environment, bring some of our own traffic calming and traffic technology so that there is more sidewalk space, but we keep traffic flowing. I mean, it's amazing what we can do with a left turn lane so that trucks and other pass-through traffic can get through, even sometimes with new technology on traffic lights. These aren't big money investments, they have huge returns. And so we want to be great partners with you. We want to work with you to find ways to enhance the city. And I know that big clunky state agencies can sometimes be, you know, here we come, you know, and but I know that we're investing more in our engagement process, which means we want to have more time up front before a project to do it right, rather than try to pay and try to figure out the fix after it's kind of too late. So, and I think that's part of our idea of value investment. Modernization is really the idea of doing the fix right. Doing a thin overlay versus a total reconstruction. I would rather do less miles and reconstruct a road that lasts 30 years rather than a road which will, after 10 years, be falling apart all over again. And this is the hard story when we're undercapitalized, when we don't have enough money. We spread it around that makes it look good for a few years, but in the end of the day, is not how it is. So this is an important slide. It's a little complicated, but it's not that complicated. Over the next 20 years, with federal guidelines toward performance measures. Now, what are performance measures? Performance measures are, we have to ensure that we are investing in the system, particularly the national highway system, based upon traffic counts. So what we see is when we don't have enough money over the next 20 years, it's just a general trend, the quality of the roads are going to be much worse, and 94% of those subpar roads are going to be in greater Minnesota. So this is not a metro, rural, philosophical decision. This is just purely what will happen given the federal performance requirements that we as an agency, we expect the interstates to be pretty comparable because they gather our performance attention because they have such high traffic volumes. On the other side is where we ultimately, where those pavements will suffer. So I've waxed on long enough. You know why transportation is important. It's not for transportation, it's for all the businesses, the livability, the health of our Minnesotans, which is why we care about it. That's why I love transportation, because it actually isn't about bridges and asphalt and concrete. It's about the people we serve and the communities we live in, and we need it really for our vibrant future. Minnesota has so much going for it, and we have so many great stories. We just want to stay on that track. So I really appreciate hearing that, and I also appreciate your support. When we've asked this in the past, and you've been wonderful, and I think your position statements, I couldn't write them myself. I embrace your role and your voices. They're very strong, and they're very important, and we definitely will have to march together and see what we can do this next year. I think it's just getting harder and harder to face a future without having action. So that's my plea, very consistent, but also maybe a little bit more nuanced from previous years. So any questions, thoughts? I know you want to swish a lot in here. I'm happy to run away, but I'm happy to just roll for it.
Thanks for the information on the numbers. If we want to do letters or conversations with our state legislators, how can we find out that information, Commissioner? You know, some of the, it's nice to know the numbers and the need and all of that. Our local economy fits in there, but is this stuff on your website?
You know, Rita, I think if it's not on the website, we can get it for you. We have it, we can get pretty granular, and my planners are going to roll their eyes when I say that. But I think that one of the things we've realized, and I think Tim alluded to that, when we talk about our next 10 projects, we're actually, you know, what we do is we're saying they're not committed to a specific project, but it gives you, given our models about pavements and bridge conditions, we can pretty accurately say, here's what is the state's facing by district and by community. But in terms of any information that we have for Bemidji, you know, you should try to find. You have, what we don't have as much is your local road system. And I know our state aid has got better in terms of tracking data. But I guess what I'd say is if we have it, we'd love to make it available to you and help you research it.
I noticed a trip recently to Wisconsin. I can't comment because I don't have the expertise, but it seems perhaps they're a bit ahead of us on infrastructure reconstruction in Wisconsin. How does their spending compare with ours in Minnesota per capita, or are they spending more of their budget on transportation there than we are?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have the exact figures. They were ahead. They are now, they're actually facing their own crisis. They don't have the dedicated streams as we do, and their commissioner, their secretary Gottlieb, has actually had to cancel projects because they have some road conditions, and they have a different model. They outsource to counties a lot of their maintenance. But I think the outlook for Wisconsin is similar to ours in terms of their condition, and partly because they've actually had some budget cutbacks. There are some states in the Midwest. I'll pick on Kansas. I just had breakfast with that group 2 days ago, and they've actually had the administration in Kansas actually took half of the transportation budget and shifted it over to solve a budget deficit. And so they have canceled almost all their new projects. Have just been wherever they are, they've actually stopped. And they're pretty glum you know, you can do that for a few years. In Missouri, similar situation. That's one of the reasons I'm really concerned about having general fund revenue that doesn't have a backstop, because it seems to be the first thing that gets cut, and having that long-term commitment of, you know, we plan projects so far in advance, in part because it takes a while to get that engineering, get the planning, do the various, you know, deliberations with local communities. So all these things are kind of needles kind of going toward trends, and Wisconsin is in difficult shape. Iowa, on the other hand, which just had a gas tax increase, their outlook looks much better. Their system is pretty healthy, but if you look at where their plan is for the next, you know, 4, 5, 6 years, Iowa is going to be looking much better, in part because Governor Branstad said, and I talked to him, I said, why don't you make the case for a gas tax increase in Iowa? And he said, I was very specific about where that money's going to go. And, you know, local communities get it, as you all do, that, you know, to support this business, to support these constituencies, we need to have some action. So Governor Branstad traveled around Iowa, and they made the case, and so their outlook was better. So kind of, I think the quick answer is, looking at a condition of a state or a road is only one point in time. It's kind of, where will it be over the next 10 years is the thing to look at. Dave?
Charlie, a lot of us have been frustrated with talks with our legislators and understanding how important transportation funding is. One of the blowbacks that I've been hearing a little bit, and I'm not sure if it's never going to gain a lot of traction, but one of those elements has been instead of, I mean, in lieu of talking about how to get more funding, he's talking about how we can stop the rising cost of construction. And insofar as one of the ones that I sent out long ago, actually, you know, kind of dove into this idea that, you know, we've got this whole system where we guarantee these highway workers X amount of dollars per hour and prevailing wage is one of the drivers of that. And, you know, I don't know anything about prevailing wage, I don't know anything about the nuances of that, but it seems to me it's kind of wrong-headed to be blaming the cost, and I know the cost continues to go up in some years 10%, and you multiply it out in 10 years, you double the price. But it's something that apparently we need to be answering to these people.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, one of the criticisms we've got, in fact, we have a criticism, one criticism in that, from feedback that otherwise was actually incredibly supportive from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and they thought that our construction inflation index of roughly 5% was too high, that inflation has really been more like 2. Why do we have this more expensive? And I think that's a legitimate concern, but you need to kind of get deeper into that, because it's not just wages, it's actually a lot of it's driven by commodity prices. And they have been rising, everything from steel to concrete. And when I had taken our construction cost increase figures to the private sector, and to be really honest, I've taken this to Dave Mortensen, I take it to my friends Pat Ryan, who run big vertical construction businesses. I said, what is your construction cost? I'm the out of line. And they've opened up to me, you know, privately. They showed me all their construction over the past few years and what they project in the future. And they, you know, they weren't planning any something to issue a press release with, but it is exactly where we are. They said this is what a construction costs are, and you know, and they both said, you know, if we can get a lower, believe me, we would, you know, but. And it's obviously complicated. I think we're doing more with what I would call alternative contracting. You know, sometimes just having us design a bridge or a road and putting it out for the low-cost bid doesn't actually, at the end of the day, save us a lot of money. We've had some design build and some CMGC, which is a managed contractor, a general contractor system, where we've actually become partners with contractors to say, how do we drive down the cost? How do we design a project with the idea of greater efficiency and actually make it something last long? And we have not only saved money, we saved money, just on 610. We actually made bridges slightly different. We've taken costs out of not buying as much right away as we initially had scoped. Because the contractors who are dealing with it actually know how to find a way to be prudent. So I think there's greater opportunity for efficiency and cost savings by how we approach our work, and we've been pursuing that. And I think even big complicated projects like our Highway 53 relocation up over an active mine, very complicated project up in Evelyn, in Virginia, and we're on budget and we're ahead of schedule, and that is in part because we have very sophisticated partners who we are working hand in hand. So I think that I caution anybody to say, well, it's because of this particular reason or that particular labor cost. I think it's a complicated puzzle, and believe me, I'm not a construction manager, but I've learned to, but I understand how a business works, and part of it is to be smart and not think that it's going to be one particularly easy solution. It's a great question. Yeah. Matt?
Commissioner Rob Wolfington, City of Benson, West Central Minnesota. We're a town of 3,200. We have 26 miles of city streets. On a good year, we'll do 5 blocks. We're not fortunate, like my colleague here in Morris, that receives the state aid.
Right.
He told me the number, it was more than we spent.
Right.
There are some tools that have been kicked around for the last few years on creating street utilities that would ease up and streamline ways to finance, so that instead of 3 blocks, 5 blocks, we could maybe do a mile a year and replace our streets every 30 years. I would hope that maybe your agency could talk to your colleagues in finance and really promote the full transportation system that includes towns in greater Minnesota that just can't keep up.
Right.
And we share your concern because our slides look like yours. The other thing I would ask is, when we are fortunate enough to get state aid dollars, and we have to from time to time to do a trail or what have you, since we are below 5,000, we have to ask our colleagues at the county to be the fiscal agents and manage our funds, because I'm guessing that there's some doubt that we're not sophisticated enough to handle it ourselves. We are.
Yeah.
And we would prefer to have that responsibility. If you could just keep that in mind. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great comments, and I will keep that in mind. And I get it. We're a big, not clunky, but we have some old systems that we're looking at to streamline, and there's no question communities under 5,000 sometimes get left off, not part of the state aid system. The governor had not originally proposed specific funding, but I've spent a lot of time talking to him, and he would like to see if there is a comprehensive plan, that there will be a mechanism for direct funding for smaller communities. And part of it certainly could come from our grant program, which have been underfunded as well, but also there might be some other options. But your comments on the need and on the idea of a fiscal agent, that I'll make sure we write that down.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Commissioner Zelle, thanks for coming again. But turning to more recent events, given that we've got a new president, I wondered if you and your colleagues have any optimism in a renewed sense of this federal-state partnership and moving infrastructure projects forward. It seems that if you could reinvigorate that partnership, be able to swing some state funds into different targeted areas. I wonder if you and your colleagues have had any conversations about that.
My colleagues in other states, or in the,
Correct.
yeah, it's obviously we just spent 2 days talking about it. I think we, like all of us, are very curious. You know, we'll kind of see how and what kind of unfolds in the next year. We think a lot of the conversation from all parties about the importance of infrastructure is encouraging. The idea, I think actually even the stock market has reacted positively with the Trump administration, in part because I think they see a stimulus in terms of infrastructure investment coming. I think that the talking points that they have outlined with a large financing component, that's will be harder for us in Minnesota because generally when there's again, it's more loan, if there's loans, you need a revenue stream, and the revenue stream is either tolling or taxes. So I'm not sure, you know, in Minnesota we don't really embrace tolling. I think that the repatriating funds from corporations outside of the U.S. and deploying them to infrastructure, we certainly would be part of that. You know? So I think that some of that is very encouraging, but you know, even with the all Republican government, there's a lot of disagreement, you know, even within that party. So I think that just yesterday, Speaker Ryan has kind of beat back the idea of earmarks. I'm not sure earmarks are really good for us in Minnesota, honestly. So I think formulas probably are our best shot. I do think, you know, we have new and some re-elected members of the Minnesota delegation, one of whom I spoke to a nice conversation with this morning, who reminded me that there was one congressman who was a very strong Trump supporter, and I said, yeah, I know who that guy is. Thank you, Tom. So, you know, I think, you know, we're going to try to work well with this administration. And what's interesting, and I think maybe ultimately, transportation is about as nonpartisan as you can find in any issue. So we hope good prudence and idea of investing in America is things that we can maybe take advantage of. And honestly, when I'm talking to other commissioners and secretaries, I don't even know if they're Democrat or Republican, because we have the same issues. And we're very, very lockstep with our workforce issues, our underinvestment, best practices. You know, could be Alabama, could be Minnesota. We're at the table. And I think Minnesota's got some great staff and great innovation and environment within helping lead the way toward what we could be doing actually. So I'm actually kind of excited about it. Don't redo it anytime.
Thanks for that sense of optimism.
Yeah.
Rod, on this speaking calls, by the way, I commend you on your regional staff for loving up there and transportation. Just alluding to your last comment on workforce issues and Washington after they passed the gas tax, all of a sudden they had a huge number of projects speed up, and we're looking at a dearth of engineers to get those out the door. I too am optimistic that in a Trump administration, everybody's going to fall on roads. Are we going to be in a position to maybe advance some of the projects that are already in the pipeline and take advantage of any federal dollars that might be available after January 1st?
Well, great comment. I think we've done a good job in the past of being ready when funds appear. And I think we certainly don't have as many projects on the shelf as we've had over past decade. But just the funding, for instance, the Corridors of Commerce program has really advanced some projects because we could bring forward projects that were in the pipeline and do them faster. We know it's partly from our own capacity, but there is a strong consulting community in Minnesota and in the Midwest, and I think we would be able to respond favorably. In fact, whenever there's I'm getting into the weeds here, but whenever there's an August redistribution, that's when the USDOT realizes other states that haven't used all their federal money they apply to other states that are able to. And this year, we took $60 million, and we're going to spend that $60 million. So we've never turned it back. So and part of that is just having our act together. But workforce issues, talent, is going to be a continuing issue that I've been spending a lot of time. It's one of my main focuses. It doesn't get all the press, but it would really pay off because, like me, there's a generation of boomers who are going to retire at some point, and we got to really mentor the next generation to keep that talent in the.
Thank you so much.